the unbearable pain. Why you must suffer to awaken. Jung's descent. Imagine standing on the edge of your own mind, staring into a vast abyss filled with memories, fears, and truths you've long avoided. Most people never dare to look that deep, but for those who do, something extraordinary begins to happen, an awakening so profound that it can shatter the old self entirely. Yet before that rebirth, there is always suffering. Carl Jung called it the dark night of the soul, the necessary descent into the underworld of our own psyche before we can rise into the light of awareness. Think about it. Every great transformation in life, spiritual, emotional, psychological, begins not with comfort, but with collapse. The end of a relationship, the death of a loved one, the loss of meaning, the silent crisis that visits us in the middle of the night when we realize we've been living someone else's life. These are not punishments from life. They are invitations. Invitations to awaken. But most reject them. Why? Because awakening is not a peaceful process. It's a fire that burns everything false until only truth remains. It is the architectural redesign of the soul, often beginning with the demolition of what was most familiar. If you've ever felt like your world was falling apart, perhaps it wasn't destruction at all. Perhaps it was initiation. Jung believed that when the soul seeks transformation, it does so by creating chaos. The ego resists change, clinging to familiar illusions. But the deeper self, the part of you that knows what you truly are, will not stop until the illusion crumbles. And in that moment, pain becomes the sacred messenger of evolution. The inner crucifixion and the false self. When Jung spoke of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming a whole integrated self, he wasn't describing something pleasant or easy. He was describing an inner crucifixion, a psychological death of all that is false. The shadow, that dark and rejected part of ourselves, must be confronted. This is the collection of instincts, shames, and traumas we pushed away to build our acceptable persona, our social mask. And this confrontation hurts because it reveals that much of what we believed about ourselves is that mask, a structure built to protect us from truth. The pain of awakening feels unbearable because it dismantles identity. It strips away certainty, comfort, and illusion. Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. We distract ourselves endlessly with noise, work, and the constant chase for validation. Because silence is terrifying. In silence, the truth speaks. But ask yourself, what if this pain is not a punishment, but a purification? What if it is the necessary burning away of all that is not real? Imagine a seed. For it to become a tree, it must first break open. That breaking is not destruction, it is transformation. The same law governs the human soul. The old must die for the new to emerge. Every person who has ever reached a state of higher awareness, from Buddha to Nietzsche, from Jung to Viktor Frankl, walked through fire first. They faced despair, confusion, and meaninglessness before they found truth. Awakening does not begin with light, it begins with darkness. It begins with the unbearable realization that the life you've been living is too small for the soul you truly are. This is the threshold that almost no one crosses because it feels like death. And in a way, it is the death of the false self, the death of illusions. Jung taught that we are not meant to avoid our suffering, but to engage with it consciously, to listen to what it is trying to teach us. Pain becomes a teacher, a doorway into the depths of being. The unconscious eruption, meeting the stranger within. When Jung explored the human psyche, he realized something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. We are not who we think we are. The mind we identify with is only the surface. Beneath it lies a vast ocean of hidden drives and forgotten emotions. Jung called this the unconscious, and when the unconscious begins to rise to the surface, life as we know it starts to tremble. This trembling is what most people call a breakdown, but Jung saw it differently. He saw it as a breakthrough. The pain of awakening is precisely this: meeting the stranger within. Think of the moments in your life when you felt lost, confused, or completely undone. Times when nothing made sense anymore. Those were not moments of failure. They were the psyche's way of calling you inward. Jung wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What we call bad luck or misfortune is often the unconscious demanding recognition, asking us to wake up. But awakening requires courage, because before light comes clarity, there is confrontation. You begin to see the hidden motivations behind your choices. You realize how fear shaped your relationships, how old wounds guided your ambitions. Suddenly you see that your suffering wasn't random. It was the map to your inner world. Here is the paradox. The more we resist this process, the more painful it becomes. Resistance feeds suffering. Acceptance transforms it. The ego, terrified of annihilation, fights desperately to maintain control. But control is precisely what must be surrendered. You cannot awaken and remain the same. To evolve, you must let die everything that is not truly you. This is also where we stop projecting our internal darkness onto the world. When we refuse to face our own shadow, we see it in others. The villain, the enemy, the bad guy. The crisis forces us to recall these projections, to admit that the chaos outside is merely a reflection of the war inside. This confrontation is the beginning of maturity. Jung was fascinated by myths because they reveal eternal truths. Every hero's journey begins with a descent into chaos. The hero leaves the familiar world, faces monsters, and endures trials. Only after confronting darkness do they return transformed. The same journey unfolds within each of us. The monsters are our fears. The chaos is our own mind. Nietzsche said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." The pain that precedes awakening is not there to destroy you, but to forge you into something greater, something truer. The wound, as the mystic poet Rumi said, is the place where the light enters you. When you find meaning in your suffering, it ceases to be just pain. It becomes transformation. Viktor Frankl echoed this. Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. The sacred emptiness and the integration of paradox. When the old self begins to dissolve, something extraordinary happens. The world itself seems to lose its shape. The boundaries between who you thought you were and what life truly is start to melt away. Jung described this as the moment when the ego encounters the self, the deeper, infinite aspect of our being. It is both terrifying and liberating, because to meet the self is to realize that you were never truly in control. At first, this stage feels like annihilation. The goals, dreams, and identities that once defined you no longer bring meaning. You may feel detached, disoriented, even empty. But this emptiness is sacred. It is the clearing of the inner ground so that something new can be born. The Buddhists call this state shunyata, the void that is not nothingness but pure potential. Before you can awaken, you must let go of everything that you thought was you. Think about how many of your decisions were made not from truth, but from fear. We build entire lives around these fears, but awakening tears down these walls. It forces you to see that the self you were protecting never truly existed. And while that realization is painful, it is the beginning of freedom. As you face this inner death, you are being emptied so that you can be filled with something infinitely more real. Jung once said that only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. You must die to live. You must descend to ascend. You must lose everything to find what cannot be lost. The darkness is not the enemy. It is the womb of transformation. Think of the caterpillar dissolving inside its cocoon, a process that looks like death, but is actually a metamorphosis. The path to wholeness is not about becoming perfect, but about embracing your totality, the light and the shadow. You cannot awaken by denying your darkness. You awaken by integrating it. The parts of yourself that you've rejected, your fears, your anger, your shame, hold the very energy needed for your transformation. This is the stage when pain becomes wisdom. When you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" Every wound becomes a mirror. Every loss becomes a message. Slowly, you begin to see that nothing was random. Everything was guiding you toward awareness. You are not broken, you are being refined. You are undergoing the alchemical process Jung spoke of, the transformation of lead into gold. The lead is your pain. The gold is your awareness. The fire is the experience that burns away everything that is false. As you walk this path, you begin to feel something subtle but powerful, the strength of surrender. You stop fighting against life and begin to move with it. Before, pain was something to escape. Now it becomes a sacred companion, a guide pointing you back to your truth, the unshakable peace and the moral imperative. At some point, the darkness begins to soften. The unbearable tension starts to dissolve. You wake up one morning and notice something subtle. The air feels lighter, the silence less threatening. You are not who you were before. That is how awakening begins. Quietly, after the fire has done its work. The moment you stopped fighting your pain, it began to reveal its true purpose. The destruction you feared was not the end, but the clearing of a path. You were being emptied so that you could hold more light. As consciousness expands, life itself starts to look different. The people who hurt you become mirrors that reflected what you needed to heal. The pain that almost broke you becomes the foundation of wisdom. And perhaps for the first time, you understand what Jung meant when he said that. No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. You cannot ascend without first descending. You cannot truly live until you have faced death, the death of the false self. The suffering was the gatekeeper. And once you walked through it, you discovered that the darkness was not empty. It was full of meaning. In this new awareness, peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence of understanding. You still feel emotions, but they no longer define you. Life stops being something that happens to you and becomes something that happens for you. Frankl said that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Awakening is exactly that. The moment when you realize that outer change means nothing without inner transformation. And once that transformation happens, you cannot go back. The old world no longer fits. You have outgrown your suffering. This does not mean that pain disappears. It means that pain becomes sacred. It becomes a reminder of your humanity, a pulse of aliveness. You stop seeing suffering as the enemy and begin to recognize it as the raw material of wisdom. Every scar becomes a symbol of rebirth, proof that you descended into darkness and returned with light. Jung's work was never about escaping the human condition. It was about embracing it fully. He believed that enlightenment is not found in denying our humanity, but in integrating it, bringing consciousness into every corner of our being. The goal is not to become perfect, but whole, to hold both light and shadow without losing yourself to either. And now perhaps you can see the truth that was hidden in the very title of this journey. Before awakening comes the pain that almost no one can bear. That pain is not punishment, it is purification. It is the test of whether you are ready to see life as it truly is. Unfiltered, raw, and alive. Those who endure it emerge radiant, unshakable, and deeply compassionate. They become mirrors for others, living proof that the soul can survive its own fire. Think about the person you have become through your own struggles, the wisdom you've gained, the empathy you now carry for others who suffer. You are no longer the same person who entered the fire. You are something greater, not because you escaped the pain, but because you walked through it and emerged conscious. So if you are in that place now, if everything seems to be falling apart, if the pain feels unbearable, remember this: you are not being destroyed, you are being transformed. The light you are seeking is already within you, waiting to be uncovered. Trust the process. Surrender to the journey. Because one day you will look back and realize that the pain that almost broke you was in truth the moment your awakening began. And that, as Jung taught, is the highest calling of the human soul: to become what you truly are, conscious, whole, and free.